Over the next 4 to 5 days while on the ground in Saigon with General Weyand and his mission, I had the opportunity to speak to an array of people. I had a connection to cabinet members from the South Vietnamese government who had been guests at my wedding just a year earlier. And I got with one, and we went off to the side and speaking Vietnamese, and he said to me, just because we're related, just because you're my relative, I'm going to tell you this, but the presidential palace is frozen. The President Thiu is unable to do anything. There is no direction coming to the government. There's no leadership there. I was stunned by this. And then out walking about the streets, I'd go to bus stations, and I'd see getting off these provincial buses, soldiers in their uniforms still coming there. How strange it seemed, but they were leaving units that were breaking apart, or they were deserting to come home and be with their families. It was a signal of the disarray of the South Vietnamese army. I met with individuals who I had known in South Vietnamese society. Several women said to me, I remember they had this glassy look in their eye. I'd never known what it meant to see fear in somebody's eyes before, almost begging me to take their children. If I give you my children, will you take my children out with you? I had American staff members coming saying, I have this expensive jewelry. I don't know what's going to happen here. Would you ever carry this out for me? Everyone was living with the sense of impending and immediate doom. In the middle of all this, I received this terrible, terrible news. My wife's brother was an ARVN Ranger, and he was in a unit out near Saigon. His Ranger unit had been overrun by a North Vietnamese force, and he had been killed. And I had to find a way to tell my wife. Beyond that, another one of her brothers was in the Central Highlands, was part of one of those divisions that was breaking up, and no one knew where he was. Was he alive or dead? That he was out, hopefully, on a road, trying to make their way somehow back to Saigon after their unit had been broken apart by the North Vietnamese. And so I had to find a time on the phone and tell her back in Washington I'd arranged for other Vietnamese friends of colleagues to go and be with her during this terrible, terrible moment. Her family was devastated. They had she had one other brother in his teens, and the South Vietnamese were out recruiting, rounding up everyone to put them into uniform. And so it was possible that all the males in the family were going to be wiped out in a week or two. I talked to American embassy staff who had been in Da Nang as they were frantically evacuating. One man was controlling access onto a plane. So many desperate South Vietnamese with guns trying to get on. When he blocked one man took a gun, pointed it right at him, pulled the trigger, and the bullet just scraped by his neck. It didn't break the skin, but it indented it and burned it black. And here he was still shaken. This had been a week earlier, and I'm talking to him, and he had been such a supporter of Ambassador Martin and all this. But then finally I went out and talked to the young military analysts from the U.S. Army and U.S. military. And they had a large map on the wall. And they pointed out where all of the North Vietnamese units were, tracking them as they moved using our intelligence sources. And you would see that the North Vietnamese had the South outnumbered at least 2-1. And it was only a matter of time of their getting all these units down when they would overwhelm the South. So it wasn't a question of whether they could or not. It was a question of when, and would they make that decision for that final assault on Saigon. That was, as the visit was drawing to an end, the assessment that I was left with, in which I would then try to convey to Ambassador Martin and others about how disastrous it was and how imminent total defeat was for South Vietnam.